Human Anatomy and Physiology, Part 2. Here on Episode 4, we shift our attention now and look at the major structures of the female reproductive system. Here we have two images, both a lateral and an anterior view of the female reproductive system. Notably, the major organs are located within the pelvic cavity. The general function of the female reproductive system is to produce offspring. With sexual reproduction, we are essentially ensuring that you have a mixture of genes in each offspring, increasing the variety of genetic characteristics, making it more likely for survival and carrying on the reproductive line. In order to accomplish this goal, the female reproductive system is responsible for producing gametes that may be able to combine with sperm to form the first line of an offspring. In the case of females, the gonads produce ova or egg cells, which then combine with the sperm. Two of the major structures I'd like to highlight on this slide and on the next slide as well include the vulva and the vagina. Notably, the external female reproductive genitalia are collectively called the vulva. The vagina, in comparison, is actually the pathway into and out of the uterus. As a result, the vagina allows for the delivery of sperm and is also the pathway by which a baby can exit from the uterus to the external environment during childbirth. Just a brief overview in looking at the vagina on this slide. It is essentially a tubular organ located between the rectum, urethra, and bladder. It is primarily composed of smooth muscle and lined with a mucous membrane. As a result, the vagina lining plays a role in lubricating and stimulating the penis during sexual intercourse. The vagina also plays a role in the transportation of blood and tissue shed that occur during menstruation, once again to that external or exterior environment. Now, if we move on to this next slide, this is simply a slightly different angle, but looking at the external female genitalia, which is collectively referred to as the vulva. You are not responsible for all of these various terms listed on the slide here, just understanding and being able to distinguish between the vagina and the vulva. Next, we look at the ovaries, the uterine tubes, and the uterus. This is an anterior view highlighting the relationship between these structures. As we've mentioned, sperm enter through the vagina, but fertilization occurs in the uterine tubes. You can see highlighted here towards the top of your screen. Notably, the uterus has 3 different regions, which are also distinguished on the far right of your screen. The perimetrium, which is the more outer layer, the myometrium, which is the middle layer, and the inner endometrium. It is the endometrium that responds to estrogen released by the follicles during the menstrual cycle and grows thicker with an increase in blood vessels in preparation for pregnancy. However, if there is no fertilization of the egg by sperm, then the corpus luteum will degrade and lead to a decline in progesterone production, which results in the sloughing or that breakdown of the inner portion of the endometrium in a process called menstruation. I should also note when we're looking at the uterine tubes, they are responsible for communicating with the ovaries in addition to being the site of fertilization. Moreover, they contain structures known as cilia that help to maintain a current in the uterine tube that helps the ovum or the ova move towards the uterus. We've talked so far about the endometrium being the inner layer. But I also want to highlight the myometrium. The myometrium, as its name suggests, is largely contained of muscle fibers. In fact, it's smooth muscle fibers. They extend in all directions. So, for example, longitudinally, so going up and down, transversely, going from side to side, and obliquely, running on distinct angles. The layers also vary in the amount of thickness depending on the location in the cervix. It is the myometrium that is able to contribute to contractions during labor. And lastly, the most outer layer is the perimetrium, and it is incomplete because it only covers part of the uterine body and not the cervix. So take-home messages from this slide, really you can see the vagina, you can see the cervix, you can also see the uterine tubes and the various layers. And their relationship to the ovaries. On this next slide, it highlights the function of the uterus. So as we've been talking about in this lecture series this week, fertilization occurs with the combination of a male and female gamete. For this to occur, sperm must ascend towards the uterine tube via ejaculation during sexual reproduction. Fertilization occurs in the uterine tube, and a fertilized oocyte will move to the uterine cavity and eventually the growing embryo will receive all of the nutrients and blood supply via the placenta. There is a rich blood supply within the endometrium, so it is highly vascularized. And this helps with the establishment of the placenta, which, as we've mentioned, is the site for which all nutrients, but also gas and waste exchange between a fetus and the mother. We've also mentioned that it is the myometrium that plays a role in rhythmic contractions during labor to assist with childbirth. Otherwise, these types of contractions are inhibited. And that brings us specifically to the ovaries. So this is a very similar diagram to what we saw 2 slides ago, but it does explicitly label the ovaries. What you can see here is that the ovaries are located on each side of the uterus and consist of 2 major layers. There's an outer layer, which is referred to as the cortex, and there's an inner layer referred to as the medulla. This is very similar to when we think about the adrenal glands, where you have a cortex and a medulla as well. The main function is to produce ova, or the female gametes, through oogenesis, and that is the process that results in the formation of a mature egg. The ovaries are also responsible for secreting female sex hormones, including estrogen and progesterone. As a result, this helps to regulate the female reproductive function. Next, I will just briefly highlight the breast and the anatomy of the breast as it pertains to lactation. So breasts are really accessory organs, and they are utilized after birth and can produce milk in a process called lactation. Breast milk is produced by the mammillary glands, and they are essentially modified sweat glands. The milk can exit through the nipple via various ducts that open on the surface of the nipple. These lactiferous ducts each extend to a lactiferous sinus and connect to a glandular lobe within the breast itself that contains several groups of milk-secreting cells in clusters known as alveoli. This is all highlighted in the diagram on your screen here. This is essential for the developing offspring in providing nourishment. Notably, it is prolactin that stimulates lactation or the production of milk, and oxytocin can stimulate the ejection of milk. Lastly, breast milk confers several advantages. If we think about nutrients for the newborn child, infant, or toddler, also can provide passive immunity from antibodies present in the milk, and also allows for emotional bonding between the mother and the child. And that concludes this lecture episode.